All right. Welcome back to the English Prep Podcast, everybody. You know, one of the biggest things that people were preparing for those big English tests, those IELTS and TOEFL and PT tests, one of the things they really struggle with is the listening section.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, and you know, it's more than just being able to hear the words.
Yeah.
It's being able to actually understand what's being said and like digest that whole picture.
It is. It's about getting the meaning. It's not just hearing sounds.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So we're going to do a deep dive today into how to really improve those listening skills. And yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of people, listening is one of the hardest parts of learning English.
I think so too, because there's so much going on at the same time when you're listening.
Absolutely.
You know, we've got different accents coming at you.
Right.
You've got the speed of native speakers.
Yeah, and they kind of mush all their words together.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's hard to even pick out the individual words sometimes.
It is. And I think, too, one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that the rhythm of English is actually very important for understanding
Right.
when you're listening.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the way that native speakers stress different syllables and words
Yeah.
can really change the meaning of what they're saying.
Absolutely. And you know, if you're trying to listen to something that's got a lot of background noise,
Right.
I mean, that makes it so much harder as well.
Oh, totally, totally. And also, you know, there's the pressure of the test itself.
Oh, yeah.
When you know that you only get to hear the recording once.
Right.
It just adds this whole other layer of anxiety
It's absolute.
to the listening process.
So where do we even begin? Like if somebody's really struggling with the listening, like what's step one?
Well, I think step one is actually recognizing that it is a challenge.
Okay.
And not beating yourself up about it, because
Yeah.
it's something that everyone goes through. But then once you've sort of accepted that it's a challenge, then you can start to really focus on building a strong foundation.
Okay, so what do we mean by a strong foundation then?
Well, we're talking about grammar and vocabulary.
Okay.
Because if you have a good grasp of those two things,
Yeah.
even if you don't catch every single word that someone says,
Yeah.
you can still often figure out the meaning from context.
Right. And I guess, you know, what you were saying before about the rhythm and things.
Uh-huh.
If you've got that good grasp of grammar, you can kind of hear where the sentences are going.
Exactly. You can anticipate what's coming next
Right.
and fill in those gaps.
Absolutely. So how do we go about, you know, building up that grammar and vocabulary thing? I mean, I know a lot of people just think, oh, you know, get a vocabulary book and just memorize 1,000 words.
Right. Well, that's not really the most effective way to do it.
Okay.
What you want to do is focus on understanding how sentences work. So, you know, like really understanding the different parts of speech, how subjects and verbs and objects all fit together.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to vocabulary, you want to learn words in context.
Good.
So, you know, reading articles, listening to podcasts, watching movies, and really paying attention to how those words are being used in different situations.
And I think one of the things that's really great about learning English is that there's so much content out there.
Oh, absolutely.
So, you know, you can actually make it fun. Like if you're into movies, you can watch movies.
Right.
If you're into music, you can listen to music. Podcasts. Exactly.
Oh, there's so much out there.
And that's all really helping you build up that foundation.
It is. It's like a subconscious learning.
Right.
You're not even really realizing that you're studying.
Exactly.
But you're still absorbing the language.
So, okay, let's say we've got a good foundation.
Uh-huh.
We're feeling confident with our basic grammar and vocabulary.
Okay.
What's next?
Well, now it's time to really dive into immersive listening practice.
All right, so what do we mean by that?
So this means making English listening a regular part of your life,
Okay.
not just something you do when you're preparing for a test.
Right.
So finding things that you enjoy listening to
Yeah.
in English and making it a habit.
So what kinds of things could people be listening to?
Well, there's podcasts, as we mentioned before.
Yeah.
You know, there's news podcasts, there's storytelling podcasts, there's comedy podcasts.
Right.
There's something out there for everyone.
I guess it depends what you're interested in.
Exactly. And then there's also radio,
Right.
which can be a good way to get exposed to different accents and different speaking styles.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's movies and TV shows,
Right.
which can be really helpful for connecting the spoken word with visual context.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, even if you don't understand every single word,
Right.
you can kind of follow along with the story
Exactly.
and start to pick things up.
And you can also use subtitles to help you
Yeah.
if you need to.
As long as you don't get too reliant on them.
Right. Exactly.
You want to be able to wean yourself off them eventually.
Absolutely.
So we've talked about sort of general listening practice, but what about if you're specifically preparing for a test,
Right.
like one of these English language tests.
Well, then it's really important to use practice materials
Okay.
that are designed for that specific test.
So where would people find those?
You can usually find them online. There are a lot of websites that offer practice tests and sample questions.
Right. And I guess the benefit of using those kinds of materials is that they're designed to be similar
Certainly.
to the actual test.
They're going to give you a good idea of what to expect.
So you're not going in completely blind.
Right.
Okay, so we're practicing with these materials. What are some things that people can do to make that practice more effective?
Well, one thing that's really important is to take notes while you're listening,
Okay.
because this forces you to really focus on the information,
Right.
and it also gives you something to refer back to later.
So what's the best way to take notes while you're listening?
Well, you don't want to try to write down every single word.
Right, because you're not going to be able to keep up.
Exactly.
So what do you recommend?
Well, what I recommend is developing a system of shorthand.
Okay.
So using abbreviations and symbols to represent common words and phrases.
Can you give us some examples?
Sure. So, for example, instead of writing because, you could just write BC.
Right. Okay.
Or instead of writing with, you
Yeah.
could just write W.
Yeah. And I guess the more you do that, the more you kind of develop your own little...
Exactly.
From the
You'll
doing.
create your own personal shorthand code.
So it makes sense to you.
Exactly.
Okay. And then what about, like, I guess trying to understand the different accents that you might hear in a test?
Right. Well, that's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, because it's not just, one type of English that you're going to be listening to.
Exactly. You can hear American English, British English, Australian English,
Right.
even Canadian English.
So how do you prepare for that?
Well, the best way to prepare is to expose yourself to as many different accents as possible.
Okay.
So you can do that by listening to podcasts from different countries,
Yeah.
watching movies from different countries, even listening to music from different countries.
So again, it's all about just getting that exposure to as much variety as possible.
Exactly. The more you listen, the more your ear will start to adapt.
Okay. And I guess eventually you'll be able to pick out those differences.
Right. And you'll start to notice the patterns and different accents.
Okay, so we've got all this great material that we're listening to, but I think one of the biggest challenges is actually staying focused.
Yeah.
Like, how do you actually make sure that you're absorbing the information?
That's where active listening comes in.
All right, so tell us about active listening.
So active listening is all about being present in the moment,
Okay.
really focusing on what you're hearing.
So no multitasking.
No, not really. You want to try to eliminate as many distractions as possible. So, if you're listening at home, turn off the TV.
Right.
Put your phone away.
Close all those extra tabs.
Exactly. You want to create a quiet space where you can really concentrate.
So minimizing distractions is key.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then what else can we do to be more active listeners?
Well, one thing that's really helpful is to ask yourself questions while you're listening.
Okay.
So like, who is speaking?
Right.
What is their main point?
Yeah.
What are the key details that I need to remember?
So almost like having a conversation with the material.
Okay.
And I guess, it can be helpful as well, if you can, to actually repeat what you're hearing,
Absolutely.
just to kind of solidify it in your mind.
Yeah, it helps to reinforce the information.
So, okay, we've been practicing our listening. We're feeling more confident. Is there anything else we can do to kind of boost those skills even further?
Well, I think it's important to remember that improving your listening skills is a journey.
Okay.
It's not something that happens overnight.
Yeah, it takes time and effort.
Exactly. But if you're consistent with your practice,
Yeah.
you will see results.
So what kind of schedule should people be aiming for?
Well, I would recommend trying to listen to something in English every day,
Okay.
even if it's just for 15 or 20 minutes.
Yeah, just to kind of keep those muscles working.
Exactly. And then as you get closer to the test, you can start to increase the amount of time that you're spending listening.
And I guess as well, starting with material that's a little bit easier.
Right.
And then gradually increasing the difficulty.
Challenge yourself, but don't overwhelm yourself.
Okay. And then what about, actually on the day of the test?
Right.
Are there any specific tips that people can use to really make sure that they're performing at their best?
Well, first of all, make sure you get a good night's sleep the night before.
Right.
Because you want to be well rested and alert.
So your brain's functioning properly.
Exactly.
Okay. And then anything else?
And then when you're actually taking the test, try to relax.
Okay.
Don't get too stressed out.
But easier said than done, I think, sometimes.
It is. But there are things you can do to help yourself relax.
Like what?
Well, you can try taking some deep breaths.
Okay.
You can try to focus on your breathing.
Right, just to kind of calm those nerves.
Exactly. And then also make sure you read the instructions carefully
Okay.
before you start each section.
So there's no surprises.
Right. You want to know exactly what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and then what about, just in terms of the listening itself?
Right.
Like, are there any strategies that people can use to make sure that they're picking up on the key information?
Well, one thing that can be helpful is to try to predict what you're going to hear.
Okay.
So based on the title of the section
Right.
or the questions that you're given.
You can kind of start to think about what kind of vocabulary might come up.
Exactly.
Okay. And I guess, once you've done all that preparation, you've got to just try and trust yourself.
Yes, absolutely.
And have confidence that you're going to do your best.
Right, because you've put in the work.
Exactly.
So you deserve to do well.
So it sounds like there's a lot that people can do to improve their listening skills.
There is.
And it's not going to be easy.
Right.
But with practice and patience, it's definitely achievable.
Absolutely.
So if you're out there and you're struggling with listening, don't give up.
Keep practicing.
Keep listening, and good luck with those exams.
You got this.
All right, that's all for this episode of the English Prep Podcast. Thanks for listening,
Thanks for having me.
and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.